And greetings to you. Joe Rubenstein here, producer and host of Real-Time 1960s. I want to thank you for joining me today and to remind you that you can find all of our content at realtime1960s.com, on Facebook as well, and if you love what we're doing, visit patreon.com/realtime1960s, support this project, get exclusive access to bonus content, and help us continue to bring you this ongoing portal into the past. That's patreon.com/realtime1960s. And today, having finished our journey through the top 10 films of 1964, we get right back on the horse for a new expedition through the films of 65. So let's get right to it. My 10th ranked film for 1965, right now. And before I start today's review, a brief caveat. I've said this before, but these movies at the bottom of my top 10 lists, 7, 8, 9, 10, at least so far, have been very difficult to choose, as there has not been one year I've covered that has produced 10 great or even 10 very good films, in my opinion. But, top 10 just sounds better than top 6 or top 4, and there are interesting things to talk about, even with these second division films. So if I'm a little more critical of some of these lower picks, that's why. Flawed but watchable films populate the bottom half of these lists. So having said that, my 10th ranked film for 1965, a solid conventional western starring John Wayne, is The Sons of Katie Elder, directed by old veteran Henry Hathaway, shot beautifully by Lucien Ballard, who's mostly remembered today for his work with Sam Peckinpah, but a master of pictorial composition. Filmed in Mexico in the first 2 months of 65, and released in June in a few select locations, and then nationwide in September. And it's a film I would recommend to any fans of John Wayne. It was the 165th of the 179 productions he would act in, or react in, as he put it. He called himself a reactor, not an actor, over the course of his 50-year career, the first decade of which, similar to Humphrey Bogart in this respect, who was kind of an urban everyman to Wayne's rural everyman. Like Bogart, Wayne labored through the 1930s in relative obscurity, pumping out B pictures at an incredible rate. And he really only emerged from second or third tier status after his portrayal of the Ringo Kid in John Ford's Stagecoach in 1939. And I'll give you a kind of drive-by ranked list of my personal top 5 John Wayne films at the end of this podcast. But despite his easygoing charisma and formidable appearance, at 6'4", unusually tall for a Hollywood actor, one of several reasons why the eye is naturally drawn to him, and there was another attention-getting factor as well, a trick he had developed of deliberately inserting pronounced pauses in the middle of sentences. He did this constantly. But despite the charisma, Wayne was not an actor like a Brando or a George C. Scott, two actors he greatly admired, especially for their work in The Godfather and Patton, respectively. He could not comprehend how Brando, who was 47 when The Godfather was shot, had so successfully transformed himself into an old man in those final scenes. But Wayne was not a guy who, through the force of that kind of talent, could lift a film into greatness. Like most actors, he was dependent on great screenwriters and great directors. Now, unfortunately, a great or even good screenplay is one of two major lacks in today's film. The other major lack, by the way, is a ruthless editor. The film is about 20 minutes too long. But Hathaway, on the other hand, while perhaps not as gifted as Wayne's two most renowned director collaborators, John Ford and Howard Hawks, was highly competent. Some of his best work can be found in a handful of documentary-style film noirs he directed after World War II, the best of which is Kiss of Death, featuring a truly frightening Richard Widmark. But earlier, Hathaway had made his bones directing westerns in the 30s, many of which starred Randolph Scott. And during this final phase of his career, in the 60s, early 70s, he returned to that genre, with Today's Film, followed in 66 by the excellent Nevada Smith, and then True Grit in 69, for which Wayne won his only Oscar. That's a film which shares two other cast members with Today's Film, Dennis Hopper and Strother Martin. So the plot of The Sons of Katie Elder is fairly simple, dealing with four brothers. Wayne, 57 when the film was shot, is the oldest, and the others, in descending order of age, are played by Dean Martin, Earl Holliman, and Michael Anderson Jr., who was only 21 during filming, so Katie Elder apparently had a record-breaking reproductive period of 36 years. But the four brothers converge in Clearwater, Texas, for the funeral of their mother Katie, with whom all but the youngest had lost touch, and about whose personal character and late-life behavior they learn quite a bit over the course of the film, as at the same time they investigate the mysterious murder of their father, who was shot in the back several years earlier by an unknown assailant after losing his ranch in a card game to Morgan Hastings, a slimy entrepreneur who, in the brothers' absence, has taken control of the town. And Hastings, expecting trouble from the brothers, has brought in a hired gun named Curly, played well by George Kennedy, for protection and possibly more. Now, there is potential for thematic depth in that story. This idea of adult children's regret for not having done more for parents who have passed on, exacerbated by the realization of how much their parents had done for them, and made even more poignant by the fact that friends or even slight acquaintances seem to have seen virtues in the departed parent, unseen or unacknowledged by the children. I mean, in the hands of a good screenwriter, that subject matter could bear further study. But any potential for depth remains unfulfilled here, as the film pretty much skims along the surface, often wavering uncertainly between drama and comedy. The allegedly comedic segments of the film, as in most vintage westerns, are unbearably unfunny, and the obligatory fist fight, here among the brothers, also begs to be cut. I mean, there may be some out there who enjoy watching actors punch the air in front of each other's faces with sound effects that sound nothing like actual punches landing, after which no one appears seriously injured. I'm just not one of them. Now, as I said, this is a conventional Western, and as such, it borrows elements from earlier, mostly better Westerns. Just a few examples. Wayne's potential love interest, played by Martha Heyer, is a pacifist, which recalls the Grace Kelly character in High Noon. The youngest brother admiring Wayne, who plays an aging gunfighter here, and the gunfighter discouraging this admiration with hard facts about that lifestyle, recalls a very good Western called The Gunfighter, starring Gregory Peck, released in 1950. The sense of a town having been infected by corruption, which is gradually unmasked through persistent investigation, recalls Bad Day at Black Rock, a kind of film noir / neo-Western released in 1955 starring Spencer Tracy. And many individual shots, some quite beautiful, derive from Ford. The striking first shot of Wayne standing on a tall hill with two huge rocks on either side of him as he observes his mother's funeral from afar. Another of him walking with that distinctive stride down a long veranda toward the camera as his three brothers sitting in the foreground rise respectfully upon his approach. These are terrific shots, but again, the strong production elements here, especially Ballard's photography and Elmer Bernstein's good music, are somewhat better than the film deserves, although they certainly enhance it. As do some strong performances, including Wayne playing a role that fits him like a glove. Dean Martin always has an easygoing, very appealing screen presence. George Kennedy, who has the physical size and nasty edge to serve as a proper antagonist for Wayne, and Dennis Hopper, who plays Hastings' morally conflicted son. These performances, too, lift The Sons of Katie Elder into the realm of the watchable. It's also the last John Wayne film where he doesn't look like a somewhat crumbling former legend. He's still a vigorous presence here, which is impressive considering the fact that just a few months before they shot this film, he was in a Los Angeles hospital having his left lung, which had a tumor on it the size of a golf ball, removed. Cancer, the result of a virtually lifelong 5-pack-a-day cigarette habit. And years later, when he was asked how he felt when he first heard that diagnosis, he said, "Well, I just sat there trying to be John Wayne." And that operation was not the end of his tribulations that fall. He had a coughing fit a few days later, ripped all his stitches loose, swelled up with edema, and then had to have a second 6.5-hour operation. So to go through all that in September, and then shoot an action film in January in high altitudes in Mexico is pretty mind-boggling. But in January, there he was in Mexico, along with an oxygen tank he brought along, which he used throughout during breaks in filming. But despite that, he does actually sound breathless in a couple of scenes, especially after dismounting his horse. So that's one achievement worthy of admiration, but Wayne also displayed a fair amount of courage in opening up publicly in December of '64 about his cancer ordeal, which was just not done back then, or at least not by Hollywood celebrities. He said, "I told the public about the cancer because I know how much solid hope my recovery could bring to many poor devils in the same fix. And if it encouraged people to get regular checkups, it would save lives. More men ought to listen to their wives when they beg them to get checkups," which is exactly what happened to him. The shoot for In Harm's Way, his previous film, had ended 2 weeks early, and when he got home he felt fine, but he kept coughing. So his wife kept pushing him to get a checkup, which he had not done in 2 years, so she may very well have saved his life. But Joan Didion, who was a wonderful writer and journalist back then, also traveled to Mexico in January of '65 as she was writing a profile of John Wayne for the Saturday Evening Post, a piece she called John Wayne, a Love Song. You can find it in her 1968 collection of essays called Slouching Toward Bethlehem. But in that article, Didion, who 20 years earlier had had a schoolgirl crush on Wayne, described her reaction to the news of his cancer. She wrote, "In John Wayne's world, John Wayne was supposed to give the orders. It did not seem possible that such a man could fall ill, could carry within him that most inexplicable and ungovernable of diseases. The rumor struck some obscure anxiety, threw our very childhoods into question. In a world we understood early to be characterized by venality and doubt and paralyzing ambiguities, he suggested another world, one which may or may not have existed ever, but in any case existed no more. A place where a man could move free, could make his own code and live by it. A world in which, if a man did what he had to do, he could one day take the girl and go riding through the draw and find himself home free. Not in a hospital, with something going wrong inside. Not in a high bed with the flowers and the drugs and the forced smiles, but there at the bend in the bright river, the cottonwoods shimmering in the early morning sun." Man, that's good writing. The Sons of Katie Elder, which cost $6.5 million to make, got good reviews and pulled in an astounding $23 million at the box office. And those strong attendance figures were due, at least in part, I believe, to the extensive publicity of Wayne's cancer and the fact that the public just wanted to have a look at this already legendary figure and just kind of, make sure he was okay. The need for heroes, it turns out, runs deep in our species, perhaps even more in eras of great turbulence and moral conflict. And Wayne, although certainly an imperfect person, as we all are, served that role for many people. And as Raoul Walsh, one of Wayne's first directors in a 1930 film called The Big Trail, said, "God damn it, the son of a bitch just looked like a man." And with that, I will give you my personal ranked list of the top 5 John Wayne films of all time. Number 5 is Rio Bravo, his first pairing with Dean Martin, who gives perhaps his best dramatic performance as a recovering alcoholic. Released in '59, this was Wayne and director Howard Hawks' answer to High Noon, which had been intended by screenwriter Carl Foreman, who was later blacklisted, as a critique of McCarthyism, as in that earlier film, the cowardly townspeople abandon the sheriff, played by Gary Cooper, and submit in the face of evil, leaving Cooper to handle the job himself, a message that Wayne and Hawks viewed as un-American. So here, Wayne, who also plays a sheriff, forms alliances and uses teamwork to defeat encroaching evil. At 2 hours 20 minutes, the film is too long, but there's great chemistry between Wayne, Dean Martin, and Angie Dickinson, good story, and a really good score by Dmitry Tiomkin, a Russian-born Jew who wrote some of the most American-sounding film scores ever, including, ironically, the score for High Noon. At number 4, I've got The Quiet Man, a Technicolor production filmed in Ireland and released in 1952. This is an entertaining, romantic comedy drama, co-starring the Queen of Technicolor, as she was then known, flaming redhead Maureen O'Hara, at her most appealing. There's a compelling romance, there's excellent comedic acting, especially by Barry Sullivan and Victor McLaglen, and some of the very best cinematography of that era, for which Winton Hawke received an Oscar, as did director John Ford, his fourth. Like some of Steven Spielberg's films, it's very idealistic, fairly sentimental, perhaps too much so, but it does put a smile on your face, and there's nothing wrong with that. At number 3, I've got Red River, released in 1948, a black and white western directed by Hawks about the first cattle drive along the Chisholm Trail, a film which features some very unusual but effective casting, as Wayne, in peak physical form, is paired off with slender, sensitive method actor Montgomery Clift. You could search every corner of the planet and not come up with two more different personalities, but it works, and Hawks, above all, was a great storyteller. Orson Welles once said that John Ford is poetry and Hawks is great prose. And Wayne, playing the tough trail boss, shows a more ruthless, dictatorial side of his personality here than he ever had before. And it's one of his best performances. John Ford, after seeing Red River, supposedly remarked, "I didn't know the big son of a bitch could act," which is pretty funny, considering the fact that Ford had already cast Wayne as the lead in several films. Number 2 is The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Not as visually compelling as some of Ford's other films, it's in black and white and shot mostly on sound stages, but maybe the best screenplay Ford ever directed, with some very interesting things to say about actual American history as opposed to the way that history is told. Jimmy Stewart actually has more screen time than Wayne, but it's Wayne you remember, along with the Merchant of Menace Lee Marvin, at his most ornery. And finally, my number 1 John Wayne film is The Searchers, released in 1956, in which Wayne himself is the heavy, although not entirely bad. His character, Ethan Edwards, is really more of an agitated obsessive, and there's a famous scene toward the end with Natalie Wood that is one of the most moving moments of any of John Wayne's films. One of the best and most influential not just westerns, but films of its era, dealing with some pretty dark topics for 1956, including bigotry, rape, and interracial mixing. But The Searchers is really a film that holds up, even 70 years later. Back in a moment. Your feedback is important to us. On Twitter, @Realtime1960s, on our Facebook page, or you can email the program, realtime1960s@gmail.com. Really, however you'd like to engage with us, we love engaging with you. And if you'd like to join our family and help us continue to bring you great content, please go to patreon.com/realtime1960s and subscribe. Don't forget to visit us at realtime1960s.com for our timeline, each and every podcast, links to social media, how to reach us directly, everything you need to know about this portal into the past that we are creating. Thanks so much for joining us, and stay tuned for the next installment of this ongoing series covering the top 10 films of 1965. So take care, and I'll see you soon.